Hey all, so this is another Spotlight with Context, and today we're going to be talking about Chee'ilth. I am not going to try and cover the incredible process that led to this character's creation, from their first inception to the work with Marvel to all the development. Some of you may have seen the video on Twitter where we talked about this. I will link that in the description. I will also link the Spotlight in the description, which I highly recommend because after the usual recommended masteries and synergies section, and relics section, there is a long bit where the designer for Chee'ilth lays out the pronunciation of a lot of the words here that I am gonna have trouble with, honestly, and talks about where this comes from, why Chee'ilth as a character is important to us, and especially to the nation that he is from, and just go read that, is what I'm going to point to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start with Chee'ilth's champion attributes specifically. Survivability of 4 is really one of the big things here. This is a tanky skill champion. One of the most important aspects of that is that they read almost buff immune, and so that just helps solve a lot of problems, right? This is one of the main reasons that people point to somebody like Kingpin. You have to play her a certain way to get this benefit. You actually have to work for it a little bit, but it's a very, very strong ability. She's an excellent debuff controller. Damage of 3.5 is very fair. This is not a Battlegrounds burster, although she could probably do some good things against Gamma mutates. We'll get to that later. But the damage is consistent and real. Ease of use 4. This was a character where they were kind of originally theorized as somebody for new players. And so literally parrying and doing 5-hit combos is supposed to be important. There are also skill expression moments beyond that, because a core part of her vision was also to teach people how to heavy counter, and you'll see nods to that. But the fundamentals of this character are quite simple. Utility at 3 honestly might be a little bit low with just how strong this character's debuff control is, plus a few of her other tricks. But like I said earlier, you do kind of have to work for some of the stronger utility, and so this is probably fair. And then Defender Strength 3, there's not a ton going on here. All of her special attacks are relatively short range, easy to avoid, but reading almost debuff immune is automatically annoying. It means she's difficult to parry, and she is also going to either bleed you through block or gain the ability to crit you through block. So there are things to deal with, and 3 is definitely fair. Moving on to strengths and weaknesses, like we talked about, she does block very well. Now, this is something that we'll talk about later, but it is specifically capping the opponent's attack rating. It doesn't interact with block proficiency, and we'll go over some of the implications of that later, but this is definitely overall a strength. Heavy countering is something that her animations lend themselves well to, and like we said, it also plays really well into her kit. So if that's something you enjoy or are willing to work on, you're going to be well rewarded for it here. And then debuff resistance. Like I said, you play her properly, she reads as almost debuff immune. Now, weaknesses, prowess is a really good shout because it is not a function of attack rating. If you try and block a special with a lot of prowess, it absolutely still can hurt. There are other things like crits through block that similarly modify damage without modifying attack rating that you're going to watch for. But as long as you understand that ability, and again, we'll talk about it more later, then you can mitigate this weakness. Bleed removal or resistance is definitely a bit of a problem for damage. You don't want to fight somebody like Gambit or Beast because they're not going to be immune to your bleeds. Your bleeds just aren't going to do much to them. That slows her way, way down. And then energy damage. Again, this is a very tanky champion with some really interesting defenses, but none of them really apply to energy damage. Getting into the actual abilities of the kit, like we talked about, Chee'ilth's story is very much focused on gamma mutates, which refers to characters like Hulk, Abomination, even Sasquatch, Rhino, and Absorbing Man has this tag as well. Against those characters, her debuffs are going to be stronger, and her synergy bonuses are going to be better. So her personal debuffs outside of that against all opponents last longer as an attacker and can be inflicted through block as a defender. Now, I believe the way this is coded, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I believe that this is considered extra duration, which means that if you are facing somebody like Angela or Blade, who reduces debuff duration, that this will count as 130% duration, and so even if it is reduced by 100%, some is going to get through there. So there are ways to use this ability to do a little bit more than just have longer bleeds. Now, Spirit Charges is probably the single biggest thing to understand in her kit, because this fuels a lot of the other stuff. Trying to get these charges faster is most of the skill expression in her playstyle. So, every 20 seconds, Sister Eagle and Brother Grizzly bestow an indefinite Spirit Charge on Chee'ilth. As a defender, this timer becomes 10 seconds. So, pretty standard defender clause. It just happens more often anyway, because the defender is probably not going to be doing the fancy things you're doing as an attacker to get these more often. So when this timer expires, Sister Eagle grants 2 indefinite cleanse passives. For those of you unaware, cleanse passives are basically the debuff form of staggers. They themselves are not considered to be purifies, and so they get by things that reduce purify ability accuracy, like Apocalypse. But when a debuff applies while a cleanse is active, the cleanse is consumed and the debuff is still purified, right? Like, that purify does not listen for ability accuracy. It doesn't listen for immunity. Not that anyone is immune to purify. But it will trigger things listening for purify. So if you are fighting somebody like Bishop with Chee'ilth and you cleanse one of his debuffs, you will still take the damage from Bishop because the game will hear it as a purify. It's a rather complicated interaction that I know throws a lot of people. My favorite metaphor I've come up with this so far is to think of cleanse as a bit of a Trojan horse for purify. It's getting it through the gate safely, but it's still a threat on the other side, right? Now, Brother Grizzly is going to give critical damage rating and bleed potency per spirit charge, so you are just generally going to do more damage as you ramp these up. You want to get through that timer quickly. Sister Eagle is the blocking mechanic we talked about. She's going to cap the opponent's attack rating at 100% of what it was at the start of the fight. So this means that recoil masteries, boosts, stat boosts from nodes are all accounted for, right? So you can't expect to take somebody on a boss node and have Chee'ilth capping their attack all the way down to their base attack. It does take into account those stat boosts. But within that context, this is very powerful, right? Because if you are dealing with somebody like, say, Hulk, right, who gains a bunch of Furies and boosts their attack rating during the fight, then this is going to basically mean that while you're blocking, those Furies don't exist. Additionally, if you are facing somebody who gains extra attack into block for one reason or another, then this just ignores that. So Chee'ilth can actually block Massacre's special 2 without worrying about that absurd attack bonus he gets, because his attack is just capped. Now, you will have to worry about the block penetration that Massacre gets if he is ignited, but often that doesn't happen on defense, and so if you're aware of the limitations of this, it's very, very strong. I know I've said that a couple times, so really digging into those limitations. This is a cap on attack rating. And so for trying to maximize this, you are going to want to look for when your opponent increases their attack. When it says this attack gains blah 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 attack rating, this special attack gains blah 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 furies, anything along those lines that gives attack rating after the start of the fight, this addresses that. But it does not protect block proficiency, so Chee'ilth's block proficiency can still go down if she gets like a passive disorient on her, right? You do want to watch for those things. Somebody like Corvus who can crit through block is still going to benefit from their critical damage multiplier here, even though their attack rating won't go up. And we already covered how a defender with a lot of prowess is still going to be able to do a fair amount of damage through her block. So you do have to watch for those, but with those caveats, this is a really powerful ability, and then well-timed blocks reduce that attack cap further all the way down to 50%, which means that if you are able to well-time your blocks, if you're able to parry your opponent, you are able to cap their attack rating at half of what it normally is. And so even against a stun-immune opponent, if you get good with Chee'ilth at reparrying, you can really shrink incoming block damage. Additionally, every time you do execute a well-timed block, that 20-second timer goes down by 5 seconds. It is going to rapidly tick through the 5 seconds, and you're going to make progress towards your next spirit charge, which is going to get you to your next 2 cleanse passives faster, and is also going to get extra critical damage rating and bleed potency for you. So literally just parrying a lot is going to ramp Chee'ilth. Now the other thing that Brother Grizzly does is he is going to give Chee'ilth her bleed debuffs. So you get bleed debuffs every single time that you strike with the adz axe, so that's going to be both of your mediums, heavy attacks, and special attacks. Which means that if you are just trying to close out a fight very quickly, you can just parry medium to get your bleeds up and to try and shorten your spirit timer. Brother Grizzly is also going to shorten the spirit timer by a full 7 seconds every time Chee'ilth punishes a heavy attack or a special attack. And so Chee'ilth can actually ramp faster against opponents with non-contact mediums or who are stun immune, right? Because that way you could potentially parry the opponent, and then they might throw a heavy, you punish the heavy and do 2 mediums and then block again and repeat that process. You can shorten the spirit timer by 5 seconds for the well-timed block and another 7 seconds for the punish, and very quickly rack up some extra bleed potency and critical damage. Chee'ilth's heavy attacks inflict additional bleed debuffs, so the final hit is going to give you 3 bleed debuffs instead of 1 because it is an adz axe hit. And punishing a heavy or a special with a heavy, as opposed to just in general, is going to pause all the personal debuffs on the opponent. So this does not apply to the parry stun, this doesn't apply to anything you're getting from nodes, but this is going to pause Chee'ilth's bleeds or a few other debuffs that we'll get to later, and pausing your bleeds is going to be really, really helpful to her damage output. So the special 1 gives Chee'ilth a Grit passive for 16 seconds. Grit is a new effect that it is basically a named type doing what Valkyrie's Sig does. So it allows Chee'ilth to strike unstoppable opponents as though they were not unstoppable for the duration of this effect. It's very, very strong. It is not slow, but it functions similarly. It allows you to hit unstoppable opponents with impunity. Chee'ilth's Grit specifically also gives all of her attacks a 50% chance to inflict a bleed debuff on top of the guaranteed bleeds from the adz axe hits. This does mean that her mediums and her heavies can actually apply 2 debuffs at a time. The special 2 inflicts a Eagle's Tranquilize debuff. This is another personal debuff that can be paused by punishing a heavy attack with a heavy. This lasts for 12 seconds and counts as a 50% Tranquilize. So reducing the ability accuracy of incoming debuffs by 50%. If they don't happen in the first place, then they don't have to be cleansed, and so you can keep a higher count on your cleanse passives. And while her specific Tranquilize is active, Chee'ilth cannot miss. And then every time a miss or a debuff would have happened but is prevented by this, the Tranquilize pauses for 3 seconds. So this is where Chee'ilth effectively becomes debuff immune, right? Because all incoming debuffs have a 50% chance to not happen at all. And when that triggers, the Tranquilize just lasts longer. And any that do get through are probably going to be cleansed because at this point you probably have stacked up a number of those passives. You have to play a particular way to have this happen, but Chee'ilth has really, really good debuff control. And if you're fighting somebody with a lot of misses, well, that's not a 50% chance for you to prevent it. Chee'ilth simply cannot miss. And so you're probably just going to keep this Tranquilize paused all the time, making her a really solid counter for Spot or Photon if you play her a particular way. Now, talking about the Photon matchup in particular for a second, note that Chee'ilth cannot block unblockable, so you do have to watch that part of the fight. But if she does go into Pure Light form, then you are going to cap her attack rating on blocks because that is Fury dependent. Your cleanses are going to deal with her debuffs, meaning that you don't have to worry about your block proficiency going down. You're going to gain the precisions from the Sig that we'll get to later because Photon is bleed immune. And you are probably going to keep this Tranquilize paused indefinitely as soon as you get it online. So it is a quite solid counter. It's just not necessarily the fastest one in the game relative to somebody like Mantis or Zima. So, moving on to the Special 3, this attack can only be used once per fight, similar to somebody like Diablo, and it grants a 35% vicious passive, meaning all of Chee'ilth's bleeds are going to be 35% stronger for the rest of the fight. And you get a regen buff healing 50% of health lost this fight, or 30% of missing health, whichever is greater. So, what this means is that if you entered the fight at like half health, and then you dropped down to 35% health, well then 50% of health lost this fight is only going to be, about 8%. And so you're probably going to get the 30% of missing health, and you can actually heal above where you were at the start of the fight. But if you entered the fight at full health, and dropped all the way down to 35%, well, then you would heal up half of that missing 65%, or about 32.5%, because that would be more than only 30% of missing health, which would be more in the realm of 20% of total health. That's a lot of math quickly, but basically it means that this is not going to fully top you up, but it is going to recognize if you've lost a lot of health in a single fight and help you out with that. It's also going to recognize to a somewhat lesser extent if you have been taking damage over the course of a quest and need to heal up. So this is a pretty versatile regen effect. Moving on to the Sig ability, now Brother Grizzly gives you a precision passive every time the opponent is immune to a bleed effect, and these are pretty chunky precisions. Over 1,000 points of critical rating, and they can stack, is going to allow you to land crits a lot more often. And then reminder that if you are keeping track of your spirit timer and increasing your own critical damage rating, that's going to benefit all of these crits. Chee'ilth can actually put out some pretty solid yellow numbers against bleed immune opponents. On top of that, while she has at least one of these precision passives, then now Chee'ilth gets the ability to crit through block. While they only get this against people who are truly bleed immune, so again, bleed resistance is something that slows her down, hitting into block and then potentially baiting out a heavy to shorten their spirit timer is going to be a very valid way to play her. This also, like we said, is one of the biggest components of their defensive threat. This is something to keep an eye on, and you definitely want the Sig for the ability to get these precisions. The other thing that you're going to get from the Sig is a really interesting ability from Sister Eagle, which is going to heal back up to 90% of all damage dealt by physical damage effects. So this is specifically red numbers that are physical. Since a lot of Gamma mutates have particularly strong physical damage effects, such as Karl's bursts through block, well then this is going to help you out with a lot of those fights. It's also just generically a good ability. It also means that she slows down Hercules. I'm sure some people will laugh about that. Moving on to their synergies, because Chee'ilth is a healer via the Sister Eagle thing, all champions besides her have their regens improved by 5%. This is specifically for named regen effects, and it is the effects themselves getting stronger. This is not an increase to a champion's regen rate, and so it won't improve things like willpower. But any regen that shows up on the HUD or is technically a regen passive is going to trigger this. If you're interested in testing if something is a regen passive, you can also potentially fight Nimrod. If it gives him a charge, it's a regen passive. Next synergy, family, with Kashala and Danny Moonstar, our other two First Nations champions in the game, gets extra health for all of them, or for all champions. And then if you don't talk, you won't know them with OG Hulk, Immortal Hulk, Sasquatch, and She-Hulk. Chee'ilth is going to get additional cleanse passes at the start of the fight, and if she's fighting a Gamma champion, she goes all the way up to their max of 10 instead. And then all of the other synergy champions get extra health. What you don't know, you'll fear with Absorbing Man, Glad Hulk, Joe Fixit, and Rhino. Chee'ilth now can go unstoppable when blocking. There's a cooldown on this, but it's much shorter against Gamma opponents, and it basically means that you can block a heavy attack, and whether it breaks through your block or not, you're going to go unstoppable and be able to counterpunch it. So there's synergy with Stand Your Ground there, because Stand Your Ground will allow you to actually block the effect and reduce the damage that way. If you don't resist the attack, then you will take some damage from it, but it still allows you to counterpunch it and use that incoming heavy attack as an opening. Something to be careful with, but I'm sure that there are fights where this is actually going to be really, really helpful. And then extra attack rating for the synergy champions. What you fear, you'll destroy with Abomination, Immortal Abomination, Red Hulk, and Overseer. When Chee'ilth gets her heavy attack interrupted, then she's going to go passively unstoppable. This again has a cooldown, but it's much shorter against Gamma champions. This is mostly just safety for throwing your heavy, right? Which can be particularly helpful if you are trying to heavy counter a heavy or a special, and you end up doing something a little riskier. This gives you that safety net. And then for all of the other synergy champions, personal damaging effects get stronger. So that's A-Bomb and Immortal A-Bomb's Poison, and I-Bomb's Acid Burns as well. That's Red Hulk's Incinerate on his special 3 and just all of his burst damage. And that is all of Overseer's burst damage while he is in his Gamma mode. So really, really powerful synergy there. And that is Chee'ilth. Like I said, I highly recommend reading through the Spotlight. There are a lot of really interesting things about this character. This is a Kabam original, but we also put significantly more work in on this character than with some previous originals to try and make sure that they fit in with the Tla Amin and Skatine nations and were a respectful way to add a character associated with those nations into the official Marvel canon. It's a really cool thing, in my opinion, that we've done here, and I think that Chee'ilth is very well designed as a great addition to the contest. Looking forward to hearing what y'all say in the comments. Oh, one last note, because I don't think I said it before here. Chee'ilth canonically uses she, they pronouns. That's why I changed throughout the video in several places. That was not me being unable to make up my mind. Both are correct. Anyway, until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.